Hey everybody, Warhamster Brady here with another episode of the Re-Federalist Report, episode number 55. Joining me today is my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V Gibbs.
Great to be here as always. Thank you for having me.
And we are here continuing our review of James Madison's notes from the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. This is our 23rd episode as we go through line by line Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention for the sole purpose of really getting into the heads of the founders to find out what they really meant by original intent. What did they care about? What did they fear? And it's been pretty good so far. I mean, this is, we both knew the Constitution pretty well, and we've both been through this before. But as we've gone through this, we're both, getting a few more insights each episode.
And as I've said before, I've always considered myself a constitutionalist, even going back to when I was a young man. But it wasn't until I was instructed by a friend of mine to really study the Madison's notes and then I had questions, and he and I kind of went through it together, that I really became the originalist that I am. It was going through Madison's notes that really made me the constitutionalist I am today, so to speak. And I mean, the other documents are important. Don't get me wrong. The ratifying convention notes, Federalist papers, letters and all that jazz. That's all important. But the Madison's notes on the Federal Convention are really the key component that you must read, must understand if you truly want to understand the Constitution from an original point of view.
Yeah, one of the things that I've found, you'll sit there and you'll see stuff like Supreme Court decisions, listen to the debate. Once you understand this stuff, what they're really thinking, it makes it so easy to see through the good and bad arguments that are made on the court. Ketanji Brown Jackson is just, she should be watching this. If anybody should be watching this series, it should be her, but that'll never happen in a million years. The other thing I find is that, you get involved in social media debates and stuff like, which I do. I like to dive into that stuff. And just having this knowledge at hand, it's such a potent weapon for just completely, shutting down bad arguments and pushing forth the good ones. And
we deal with people in an age of interpretation, and people. It's funny because when I get into these discussions, say, "Well, that's your interpretation." Actually, it's not. It's the founder's interpretation. I'm just the messenger.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times the subject of repealing the 17th Amendment comes up, and but you have to understand why that makes sense,
right?
Why they made the compromise for the apportionment the way it was. And that kind of segues into what we're talking about today, because when we left off the subject at the hand, there were the two main topics that were being debated. One was basically the nature and makeup and who appoints, the legislature, which is now, it's been decided it'll be two different branches, the Senate and the House of Representatives. But the other issue that just came in is states' rights, and that's a big one for us. And so that's where we left off, and I'm going to jump back into it.
Yeah, and that's a reoccurring theme often through what we've been going through. But as they proceed, states' rights and state sovereignty and what the states will have to say about this becomes definitely an important part of the discussion. Remember, folks, if you've been watching the other episodes, and if you haven't, go back and listen to them or watch them. There's been a number of times where they'll say, well, question is, will the states ratify such a thing? Will they accept such a thing? And we're going to get deeper into that today. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we've been going through this day by day. We're on June 25th, 1787. We left off with James Wilson had made an amendment that nobody even bothered seconding. We got a kick out. And the next guy to speak is going to be Mr. Ellsworth of Connecticut. One of the things we want to keep an eye out for is small state versus large states, because they had a little bit different aims coming in. And Connecticut would have been considered a small state. Mr. Ellsworth saw no reason for departing from the mode contained in the report. He's talking about, I believe he's referring to the Virginia plan. Whoever chooses the member, he will be a citizen of the state he is to represent and will feel the same spirit and act the same part, whether he be appointed by the people or the legislature. We actually got to stop right there because this is a huge issue. This goes right back to our 17th Amendment. What they're talking about is, should it be popular vote for the senators or should it be appointed by the legislature? And as we talked about last week, the founders looked at the people make up a state. The states send their delegations and they each have equal representation in this convention. But we don't have all of the people here voting on this stuff. So the state is a different entity than the people. Unfortunately, with the 17th Amendment, it's gone to popular vote. And what we see, and what Ellsworth doesn't foresee, is that now our senators basically don't represent their states. They represent a national political party. And
we have to also understand something that they were looking at. You got to remember, these guys were studying or had studied history. They knew history. They knew their English history, especially. But most of these guys, if not all of them, were well versed in Greek history, Roman history, and the history of the world per se. And one of the things that they realized was that having an aristocracy, people who are skilled in the science of politics, was important. Yet when you have an aristocracy, you wind up with this elitism and so on and so forth. So trying to figure out a way to create a pseudo aristocracy so they could have the benefits of aristocracy without the dangers of aristocracy. And there is no nobility. There is no, king or higher classes, the gentry. None of that exists in America. America is Americans. And anybody can eventually, if they work real hard and they do whatever they do, they can sit at the table of all the other people who are near the top. This is the way the system's supposed to work. And so how do you create an aristocracy without creating an aristocracy? And this is where the voice of the states as entities became important, because the states sent these delegates while the people, these people in their states represent the people. Ultimately, they were representatives of not we the people, but the states. Yes, it is we the people as well, but they were delegates for the states, and each state was a separate entity. So the question is, how do we, A, use that for a pseudo aristocracy, and B, because we know that the states are very different, very individual, developed differently than the other states. Each has their own issues that are important to them. How do we make sure that the states who are writing this document maintain oversight over this, as I like to call it in my classes, this Frankenstein monster that they're creating? And so it's kind of a twofold idea here. Go ahead.
Very good. Ellsworth goes on and says, every state has its particular views and prejudices.
You just said that.
Even more
I
so.
hadn't even looked at the screen, so this reminds everybody. Yes, I've been through this before. But anyway, go ahead.
It's more so. It was more so the case back then than it is today. But
yeah, oh, absolutely. Well, I don't know. Have you ever been to Boston? Just saying. Okay.
Far too often.
You want to talk about particular views and prejudices and a whole different language? Go to Boston. All right. And I love you, Bostonians. I'm not making fun of you. It's just the reality. You're probably laughing too. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, you don't live next door to those assholes, so I am making fun of them.
Yeah.
Okay. They all have their particular views and prejudices, which will find their way into the general councils through whatever channel they may flow. Wisdom was one of the characteristics, which, if it was in contemplation to give the secondary branch, give the second branch.
It's saying second branch. Once again, folks, the language they're using, they're talking about the second house. Because remember, going into this, there was only one house of Congress. It was a unicameral Congress.
And the issue with that is you basically was one representative per state. So the small states could gang up on the big states. And that's one of the things they wanted to get away from. They wanted to balance it so neither big states could pick on the small if it was population based or.
And history had shown bicameral bodies typically did well. You look at Rome with the Assembly, with the Senate. You look at, even the British system with the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Continue, please.
Would not more of it issue from the legislatures than from an immediate election by the people? He urged the necessity of maintaining the existence and agency of the states. All right, good job, Ellsworth. Without their cooperation, it would be impossible to support a Republican government over so great an extent of country. An army could scarcely render it practicable. The largest states are the worst governed. Virginia is obliged to acknowledge her incapacity to extend her government to Kentucky. Massachusetts cannot keep the peace 100 miles from her capital and is now forming an army for its support.
They're talking about Shays Rebellion. Thank you. You and I are going to say the same thing.
Yeah. And it's important to note the reason for Shays Rebellion was disgruntled veterans who didn't get paid.
They got paid fiat paper, worthless things. But anyway.
And Hamilton's rubbing his greedy little hands at that thought. How long Pennsylvania may be free from a like situation cannot be foreseen. If the principle and materials of our government are not adequate to the extent of these single states, how can it be imagined that they can support a single government throughout the United States? The only chance of supporting a general government lies in engrafting it on the individual states. This is absolutely genius, Mr. Ellsworth. We continue. Dr. Johnson, and that is William Samuel Johnson, also from Connecticut. He urged the necessity of preserving the state governments, which would be at the mercy of the general government on Mr. Wilson's plan. So, historical note, where is Connecticut located? It's up here in New England, and it's surrounded by a couple of pretty big states, Massachusetts, and not far from New York. So it recognizes they are going to push for state power or state sovereignty. James Madison, speaking in the third person, thought it would obviate difficulty if the present resolution were proponed and the eighth taken up, which is to fix the right of suffrage in the second branch. So there's two topics on the table here. Next to speak is Dr. Williamson. And
I want to real quick, if you don't mind me having pause here. And I'm going to get a little ahead here. And folks, I'm not trying to run the story, but understand we have a battle here. Big states, small states, Virginia plan, New Jersey plan. And it really hasn't been decided yet which to do. And I want to make sure that we understand as we go into this, listening to Ellsworth, he's the guy in Connecticut that kind of came up with what would become known as a Connecticut Compromise. Why can't we have both? And Roger Sherman typically gets the praise for it because he's the one that announced it, but it was really Ellsworth that kind of came up with it. And so I just wanted, as we're listening to these names, these different people, I want to give a little identity here. So when you hear Ellsworth speaking, remember, he's the guy that's going, okay, big states want this, small states want that. How can we compromise it? How can we make it work so that both things get, taken care of? And what will that do on a broader scale? How will it be good for the system? His mind is working in that way. So when you hear these voices, once again, let's remember these guys have, these characteristics, these thoughts going on. All right, go ahead.
And Ellsworth would go on to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from 1796 to 1800, to be replaced by one of our all-time favorites, John Marshall. But
Ellsworth is the third Chief Justice.
Yes. He's not a well-known founding father, but he's one of the better ones. All right, next to speak is a Dr. Williamson. That's Hugh Williamson of North Carolina. He professed himself a friend to such a system as would secure the existence of state governments. The Hamilton's just over there in the corner, just grinding his teeth.
Well, you got to remember the Carolinas and Georgia, they being detached from the North a little bit, they had more of a We're an individual autonomous system. Leave us the hell alone. Let us do our thing kind of attitude. So most of them, Pinckney, sometimes I'm not sure, but most of them, that was their attitude. So when you hear Williamson speak, remember that this is also kind of where he's coming from. Go ahead.
The happiness of the people depended on it. He was at a loss to give his vote as to the Senate until he knew the number of its members. In order to ascertain this, he moved to insert these words. After second branch of the national legislature, who shall bear such a proportion to the number of the first branch as 1 to blank. He was not seconded. He was saying there has to be he wanted to know what the ratio of senators to representatives is going to be.
And by doing that, he's trying to push the idea that it's going to be based on population, or at least he's either trying to push it or he's trying to expose it and trap them, one or the other. And they haven't even gotten to that point yet. And I'm glad that they didn't pay him any mind on that. But anyway, go ahead.
Mr. Mason, the great George Mason of Virginia, it has been agreed on all hands that an efficient government is necessary, that to render it such, it ought to have the faculty of self-defense, that to render its different branches effectual, each of them ought to have the same power of self-defense. So I think he's referring to checks and balances.
Well, and see, here's the thing about checks and balances, and this is something that people miss, because along with checks and balances goes the separation of powers. Checks and balances are not just one branch trying or some other part imposing, but because of separation of powers, that other branch saying, well, I can resist that. I don't have to succumb to it. And this kind of, in today's political world, this kind of comes to play where you've got the judicial branch and the legislative branch trying to micromanage the executive branch and then calling it checks and balances. Well, at the same time, that doesn't mean that branch has to succumb to micromanaging. So they have to be able to defend themselves against encroachments by other bodies as well. So checks and balances goes both ways, is in other words what I'm saying.
He did not wonder that such an agreement should have prevailed in these points. He only wondered that there should be any disagreement about the necessity of allowing the state governments the same self-defense.
Yeah, are we talking, I don't know, states' rights and state sovereignty?
From George Mason? I can't imagine that.
Remember, folks, George Mason winds up pretty much becoming the leader of the anti-federalists. Anyway, continue.
If they are to be preserved, as he conceived to be essential, they certainly ought to have this power, and the only mode left of giving it to them was by allowing them to appoint the second branch of the national legislature.
Now, this is key. This is key.
Repeal the 17th Amendment, please. They stole that power.
Well, and this is key because, see, I mentioned the word oversight earlier, as in the states having oversight. How do you give the states oversight over the monster it's creating? You make sure that they're involved in all the processes. And what best way to give them a voice in the processes than them having a voice through the legislature? Give one house to the people, the other to the states, and give the states on some of the issues final say.
Yeah, one of the questions that Doug and I get asked quite a bit is, what if we had a convention of states, or what amendments would you propose? And one thing that I haven't talked a lot about, but I want to start talking about more, to Doug's exact point, is, one of the big questions is on judicial review. Does the Supreme Court have the right to determine what is constitutional and what isn't? And that was brought up and shot down here at the convention, and within very shortly thereafter, the Supreme Court gave itself that power, and it's been a problem for the last 200-something years.
Yeah.
One of the things I would propose is to have a state-led constitutional court, where basically their entire job is, every time Congress proposes a bill, they basically say, no, you don't have that authority in the first place, or no, that's not constitutional. I think that would be a better mechanism of ensuring that Congress stays within its lane than to have the Supreme Court do it post facto.
I have a friend of mine who has suggested doing the same thing, but at the federal level. And I always told him, you don't have the same body police itself. And that's why what you just said is brilliant. It is an outside body policing the federal government in a sense when it comes to constitutionality.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't rule. It wouldn't be a court that rules on anything else, like no trials, nothing like that. Its only purpose is to oversee Congress to make sure it stays in its lane.
Right.
So it's something we should talk about more. But that's been rattling around in my head for quite some time. All right, Mr. Butler.
Well, could we keep California out of that list, though? But anyway, all right, go ahead.
Well, you don't want to have a 50-panel judge, so it's going to have to somewhat rotate. But at the end of the day, they will have established over 200 years of precedence, and you're not going to go ahead and turn the Constitution on its ear. There would be, you'd have some mechanisms in place to keep California from being California.
Well, yeah, it's called Reynolds v. Sims.
If you want to know what he's talking about there, go find our video that we did on Reynolds v. Sims. It's one of my favorite topics. Mr. Pierce Butler of South Carolina, observing that we were put to difficulties at every step by the uncertainty whether an equality or a ratio of representation would prevail, finally in the second branch, moved to postpone the fourth resolution and to proceed to the 8th resolution. So those resolutions they're talking about, I have them all right here. These are from the Virginia plan. And right there, they've been debating the fourth resolution. Now they want to skip to the 8th resolution, which is that the executive and a convenient number of the national judiciary ought to be composed a council of revision with authority to examine every act of the national legislature before it shall operate. What did we just say?
That's familiar. Yeah.
Jeez, what were we talking about? All right.
Well, see, you don't have to have that if the Senate and the state senates are properly composed.
Yeah, if our U.S. senators are representing their states and not a national political party, then that is the check, because they're not.
And if they are being chosen by two houses of state legislatures that are based one on population and a Democratic vote, and the other one based on a geographical composure. In other words, that most of them are going to represent what's geographically dominant, which is the rural state areas. You're not just going to have senators, but you're going to have senators that understand more deeply what represents the state, because they're not just going to be representing the cities.
Okay, we are done for the day. They adjourn. They had to take a vote on one of Massachusetts to put up. The noes win that, so nothing passes. So we are going to move to June 26th, Tuesday. The duration of the second branch.
And if I'm right here, we're getting really close to about the 6th week of where things get interesting, folks. Yeah, we're close.
Yeah, this is 5th week, and they're going to take a break for July 4th next week.
Yeah, we got some fascinating things that are on the horizon. Mr. Hamilton is going to be furious.
All right, so the subject today is the duration of the second branch. How long should senators sit? And going back to the point we just discussed about, having the senators be appointed by the legislature, there's an additional point on that, is they also had the ability to be recalled.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a point that's been debated, whether they actually had the ability to recall. Doug's done the homework, and I'll tell you it absolutely was the case, because we've had, one senator recalled?
At least one. There's been more, but the one that comes to the top of my mind, the first one was John Quincy Adams. The Federalists in Massachusetts weren't real happy about his decisions, so they yanked him from the Senate.
Yeah, and McClanahan just did a video last week on John Quincy Adams, which was pretty darn fascinating. He was he was a character. We'll have to spend some more time on John Quincy.
Yeah, he's a great example of someone who grows and changes his mind as he gets older and wiser. But anyway, continue, please.
And he most certainly started out as a nationalist.
Hamiltonian. He was definitely his father's son. early on.
Next to speak is Mr. Gorham of Massachusetts. He moves to fill in the blank with 6 years, 1/3 of the members to go out every second year. Mr. Wilson seconds
Boy,
the motion.
Gorham nailed it. How did that happen?
General Pinckney, the older Pinckney, I believe, opposed 6 years in favor of 4 years. The states, he said, had different interests. Those of the Southern and of South Carolina in particular were different from the Northern, correct? Mm-hmm. If the senators should be appointed for a long term, they would settle in the state where they exercise their functions and would in a little time be rather the representatives of that than the state appointing them. Valid point, Pinckney. What he's saying is, yeah, it's typical. We've got these congressmen from California who don't even have a residence there. They spend all their time in D.C. and they start working for a national government instead of their state that they're supposed to be representing. That's what Pinckney's saying here.
Well, and this is what fascinates me, because Gorham kind of nailed it, and he's from Massachusetts, and Pinckney's kind of questioned it, and he's from South Carolina. It's almost like a episode of The Twilight Zone where you've got a Massachusetts, and I guess that's what you would call them, actually making sense at that time. Massachusetts was not known for small government thinking. Let's just put it that way.
Next to speak is Mr. Reed. That is George Reed from Delaware. Mm-hmm. People are watching, I keep looking up to the right. I've got a little list of all the delegates and where they're from, just so I get an easy reference on my other screen. So that's why I keep looking away to make sure I get the right state. He moved that the term be 9 years. This would admit a very convenient rotation, 1/3 going out triennially. He would still prefer, quote unquote, during good behavior, but being little supported on that idea, he was willing to take the longest term that could be obtained. Guess they weren't worried about term limits, were they? Mr. Broome, that's Jacob Broome, also from Delaware, seconds the motion. So they were probably talking among themselves beforehand. And now we're going to get a really long dissertation by James Madison. Yeah, the other issue with having 9 years is, think what that would do to our election cycle. Right now, it's bad enough we got every other years, and the midterms have lower turnout and stuff like that. But you do this, what they're talking about, you're going to have an election every single year.
Well, and George Reed is a interesting founding father, because he had a firsthand experience with dealing with the British when the British captured the Delaware governor in 1777. Reed took over in the emergency. He led the state through the war. He's the one that was in charge of raising money, raising troops, supplies for defense of the state. And so in many ways, he was very protective of Delaware. And remember, Delaware wasn't original. It wasn't one of the original colonies. There were actually 12 colonies. It was considered the southern counties of Pennsylvania. And so Reed's looking at everything from a point of view that he's looking for a little bit more, what's the right word? Stability. I just want to bring that to mind as we're going through this, that he's, and another thing that's interesting about him is, if you go back to because he was also there for the Continental Congress when there was the resolution for independence, and he was one of them that believed they were acted too hastily and voted against it. So just keep these things in mind when you hear George Reed speak.
Very good, Douglas. All right, James, I just want to point out, Madison wasn't any more long-winded or much than most of these guys, but he's the one taking the notes, and he's going to take the notes on what he actually had put up there.
And Madison was actually more long-winded than what he writes. You'll notice in his notes, he abbreviates what was said by himself more than other people, more often than not. And so I think he was even more long-winded. And that's like me trying to be secretary. It's hard to write the notes when you're the one talking. But anyway, go ahead.
He says, in order to judge of the form to be given to this institution, I believe he's referring to the Senate, it will be proper to take a view of the ends to be served by it. These were first to protect the people against their rulers. Secondly, to protect the people against the transient impressions into which they themselves might be led. Interesting. The Senate is there to protect everyone from the government and also to protect the people from themselves from being led astray by some populist rhetoric.
No, and remember, these guys understood extremes. What they were looking for was a balance. And we live in a world today where you're either this or that. And the founders lived in a very similar world, and they were looking for that balance so that it wasn't this or that. It was kind of, well, why can't we have both? But anyway, go ahead.
A people deliberating in a temperate moment and with the experience of other nations before them on the plan of government most likely to secure their happiness would first be aware that those charged with the public happiness might betray their trust.
How do you guard against it, folks? How do you guard against it? Is checks and balances enough?
And it's just another example. They understood human nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Power corrupts. An obvious precaution against this danger would be to divide the trust between different bodies of men who might watch and check each other. In this, they would be governed by the same prudence which has prevailed in organizing the subordinate departments of government, where all business liable to abuse is made to pass through separate hands, the one being a check on the other. It gets back
to what we were talking about earlier about when we were first talking about, you discussing having some type of agency through the states to check constitutionality. And like I said, you don't want an agency being the auditor of itself. And that's exactly what's being said here.
It would next occur to such a people that they themselves were liable to temporary errors through want of information as to their true interest, and that men chosen for short term and employed but a small portion of that in public affairs might err from the same cause. This reflection would naturally suggest that government be so constituted as that one of the branches might have an opportunity of acquiring a competent knowledge of the public interests. Another reflection equally becoming a people on such an occasion would be that they themselves, as well as a numerous body of representatives, were liable to err also from fickleness and passion. A necessary fence, he's making a really good case for checks and balances, limited government.
Well, not just checks and balances, but also he's making a great case about how the two houses of Congress need to be different from each other.
A necessary fence against this danger would be to select a portion of enlightened citizens whose limited number and firmness might seasonably oppose against impetuous counsels. He's basically saying the House of Representatives is going to be fickle because populist ideas rise and fall pretty quickly. They want
once again, they held this idea that while they didn't believe in aristocracy, they did believe that there were those that were wiser or more skilled in politics. And when people are first getting into politics through the people, it's not someone who understands the complexities of politics. It's someone from the neighborhood who says, I'm going to go to Washington, get something done. And, and they're understanding this, that's the kind of person that's going to wind up, Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of thing, in the House. But then he gets there and he finds out, well, it's a little more complex than I thought. There's a lot of other hands in the jar. And it takes someone who's skilled has the skills and have been in the system while, and I hate to use this terminology, but someone who's an elite politician, and they believed that was a necessary component of a successful system.
It's absolutely also an argument against direct democracy.
Mm-hmm.
When Obama says elections have consequences, what he's saying is if we get 50% plus of the vote plus one, we can do whatever we want. And Madison's saying, no, not so quick. It ought finally to occur to a people deliberating on a government for themselves that as different interests necessarily result from the liberty meant to be secured. The major interest might, under sudden impulses, be tempted to commit injustice on the minority. That's the argument for a republic against a democracy right there.
Mm-hmm. And remember, Madison went into this thing as a nationalist. For those of you who've been with us along this program since the beginning, are you starting to see the growth here?
Yeah, but the other, it's important to put, today in modern politics, Democrats say they're for the minority, but they're not. Mm-hmm. A republic protects the interests of a minority.
Well, they don't say they're for the minority. They say they're for the minorities, but the minority they call what was the tyranny of the minority is what I've heard a few Democrats say. It's a twist of Jefferson's tyranny of the majority quip when it comes to democracy. So they don't say they're for the minority. They're for the minorities, different groups, not the minority as in the lesser represented overall, which would be the rural areas. But anyway, continue.
Well, that's the important part of a republic. It means it's a rule of law. It means just because you're currently in the minority politically, you still have rights. And direct democracy,
and you should still have a voice.
And direct democracy takes that away.
Absolutely.
In all civilized countries, the people fall into different classes, having a real or supposed difference of interests. There will be creditors and debtors, farmers, merchants, and manufacturers. There will be particularly the distinction of rich and poor. It was true, as has been observed by Mr. Pinckney, we had not among us those hereditary distinctions of rank were such a great source of the contests in the ancient governments, as well as the modern states of Europe, nor those extremes of wealth or poverty which characterized the latter. And that was the case back then. We didn't have all
and a lot of the guys that were considered wealthy were land rich but cash poor. But
we cannot, however, be regarded, even at this time, as one homogeneous mass, in which
we're not collectivistic. We're not a collective, but we're not those extremes of different classes.
We're mixed people. Each has their own needs and desires. One homogeneous mass in which everything that affects a part will affect in the same manner the whole. In framing a system to which we wish to last for ages, we should not lose sight of the changes which ages will produce. Pretty wise words here. He's, they talk about, equality for all and everything like that. And he's saying that's not the case. It's not the way society works.
Let's take something else into consideration as well.
Yeah,
it took at that time about 2 months for a letter to cross the Atlantic. We are where in this? About 5 weeks in?
Yeah.
And Madison and Jefferson have been corresponding. Jefferson's responses have started arriving over the past week. So not only are you seeing Madison's growth, but you're also seeing Jefferson's influences.
This is also he's making the argument of equality of rights versus equity. Mm-hmm. We do not preach equal outcomes.
He's talking natural law. He's talking true rule of law, the laws of nature and nature's God, this idea of our rights, that we are equal in opportunity. God didn't, when he gave us our rights, say, well, some of the rights go to you. You get all of them. You might get a few of these ones. No, we're all created equal. We all get all the rights. That government is simply there to create an orderly society and not take away your rights, but sometimes make laws regarding our rights to make sure that we don't run into each other in the intersection, so to speak. So, and this is what Madison is capturing right now, is all of this. And it's kind of nice because I'm watching all of these diverse voices. And then he says, well, wait, come on, everybody. This is what we're looking for.
An increase of population will of necessity increase the proportion of those who will labor under all the hardships of life and secretly sigh for a more equal distribution of its blessings. This is just a brilliant paragraph that he's doing here. These may in time outnumber those who are placed above the feelings of indigence. According to the equal laws of suffrage, the power will slide into the hands of the former. No agrarian attempts have yet been made in this country, but symptoms of a leveling spirit, as we have understood, has sufficiently appeared in a certain quarters to give notice of the future danger.
And
Wow.
stop right there. What does he
Wow.
mean by the leveling spirit? What he's talking about is redistribution of wealth.
Yes, exactly. This is very prescient.
Yes, it is. Now, remember Samuel Adams during the Revolutionary War, just before it, had indicated also that the schemes of leveling, which is redistribution of wealth, is always fails, and it's not constitutional, basing it on the British Constitution. Madison is a student of that. He fully recognizes what utopianism, communitarianism, collectivism, whatever you want to call it at that time is, and he's recognizing that that is a reality that always lurks in the corners, and as systems grow, always seeks to entangle itself into whatever system is created. So the question now is, how do you guard against that?
These guys are classical liberals following the teachings of men like John Locke.
Right.
But Locke's counterpart was Rousseau, and Rousseau was a collectivist, the father of collectivism, I would say. And his words and teachings were already spreading around Europe, and that's what he's guarding against.
Yeah, Robespierre is already listening to.
Yeah, Robespierre was a young man in 1787, but the French Revolution is 2 years away.
Yeah,
Robespierre would, the Holy Terror is about to happen.
Well, and the French Revolution is a great example of the extremes that Madison and the founders are warning against. Rather than going for extremes, it's balanced. The extreme in the French Revolution, for example, is, well, since aristocracy and nobility is the problem, we'll go the exact opposite into collectivism. Since the state church is the problem, we're going to go the opposite into complete secularism. And it's these opposite extremes that grab hold of this country, and that's how collectivism, that's how Marxism, socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it, it's the same animal. Goes all the way back to all the way back to the beginnings of mankind. It's been around. That's how it takes hold. That's the secrets it whispers in people's ears, and Madison is very wisely saying it's there. We need to create the system to guard against that.
Yeah, and the French Revolution, again, starts 2 years later, starts out as a Republican revolution. They were trying to follow in the footsteps of America. They quickly, when these leftist ideas took over, it became incredibly violent. And the left has always been the violent ones because it is mob rule. How is this danger to be guarded against on Republican principles? How is the danger in all cases of interested coalitions to oppress the minority to be guarded against? Among other means.
Now, let's stop there for a second. To oppress the minority. And I want you to understand what he's talking about. He's not talking about identity politics. He's not talking about minority groups. He's talking about democracy, majority, the city voice versus everyone else. The minority has to be represented, and democracy does not represent the minority. He's talking about the 49% in the 51% versus 49% scenario. Go ahead.
Among other means, by the establishment of a body of government sufficiently respectable for its wisdom and virtue to aid on such emergencies. The preponderance of justice by throwing its weight into that scale. Such being the objects of the second branch in the proposed government, he thought a considerable duration ought to be given to it.
Okay, I want to stop you there for a second, and you miswording something actually brought something to mind. So, sufficiently respectable for its wisdom and virtue to aid in such emergencies. You said emergencies. What he's talking about is something emerging. And what comes to mind is, and I've always joked about this, but I'm serious, bad governance, systems of bad governments, tyranny doesn't just, it's like the old saying that Satan doesn't appear as Satan, he appears as an angel of light. It doesn't just suddenly, it emerges like something coming out of the lagoon, so to speak. It's this slow emergence, and that's what he's talking about here. that we're dealing with a slow emergence of things that we need to guard against. Go ahead.
Very good, Douglas. He did not conceive that the term of 9 years could threaten any real danger. But in pursuing his particular ideas on the subject, he should require that the long term allowed to the second branch should not commence till such a period of life as would render a perpetual disqualification to be re-elected little inconvenient either in a public or private view. He observed that as it was more than probable we were now digesting a plan which in its operation would decide forever the fate of the Republican government, we ought not only to provide every guard to liberty that its preservation could require, but be equally careful to supply the defects which our own experience had particularly pointed out.
So question is, you give these people long terms, how do you fix it if it's a bad choice? How do we address the defects if they appear? Everything looks good on paper.
Yeah, this is one of the best paragraphs we've been through so far.
I'm a huge fan of Madison, always have been. People ask me who my favorite founding father is, and I always quip that it's Elizabeth Powell. But and I have my own reasons. But Jefferson and Madison have always battled for that top, and even Franklin, but really Jefferson has battled for that top spot. While I absolutely adore Jefferson, he got it right from the very beginning. He went into this with the right frame of mind. I respect Madison because you watch his growth. This is not something he would have said 5 weeks before. 5 weeks before, he was recommending that the national legislature be able to cancel out state law. Now he's like, wait a second, I'm getting it. And this is what we need to do. I'm understanding the balance, the proper distribution of power that we're trying to do here. And this is something much more, than we thought in the beginning. And remember, this is the guy who wrote the Virginia plan. So not only is this the best thing, probably one of the better soliloquies in the convention, but it's coming from a man who's really starting to get it.
Next to speak is Mr. Roger Sherman, also of Connecticut. So Connecticut's having a big day today.
Well, and remember, Ellsworth and Sherman are already starting to talk about, they're starting to think about this compromise. While it's Ellsworth's idea, Sherman is on it. So keep that in mind as you listen to him speak.
So Sherman says, government is instituted for those who live under it. It ought therefore to be so constituted as not to be dangerous to their liberties. The more permanency it has, the worse, if it be a bad government. Frequent elections are necessary to preserve the good behavior of rulers. They also tend to give permanency to the government by preserving that good behavior because it ensures their reelection.
Yeah, in other words, if you're worried about losing your job, you're not going to be tyrannical.
And then we have to juxtapose that against Hamilton's proposal of a permanent elected king. And if you have a permanent king, you can't really depose him now, can you?
Yeah, and now at the same time, you have to be careful with the elections being too short. Once again, we're looking for balance, because then if you have a constant turnover, then you've got inexperienced people holding office. So you need someone there long enough that they understand, they get their sea legs, so to speak, and they understand what's going on. But at the same time, they're not there so long that you can't get rid of bad apples.
Sherman continues, here in Connecticut, elections have been very frequent, and yet great stability and uniformity, both as to persons and measures, have been experienced from its original establishment to the present time, a period of more than 130 years. So even under the king, they did have legislatures, the first of which, of course, was in Virginia, the House of Burgesses. But these colonies did have elected officials.
Now, there were times as punishment, and Massachusetts could tell you this quite well, where the British would say, yeah, you're not allowed to have your legislature. We've decided you've been bad. But for the most part, the British leadership left these local legislatures alone.
Yeah, you'd have a British appointed governor and court systems, but you had your own legislature to handle internal affairs for the most part.
Right.
The better you behaved, the less the governor would interfere. He wished to have provisions made for steadiness and wisdom in the system to be adopted, but he thought 6 or 4 years would be sufficient. He should be content with either.
So in other words, we ain't doing this 9-year thing, but 6, I could see that. That's what he's saying.
Mr. Reed, again, George Reed of Delaware, wished it to be considered by the small states that it was in their interest that we should become one people as much as possible, that state attachments should be extinguished as much as possible, that the Senate should be so constituted as to have the feeling of citizens of the whole. No, Reed, no. That is not the spirit here. What he's talking about is a homogenous one nation, one national identity.
Right. And of course, Hamilton jumped to his feet after that.
Yeah, here he is next. Cue the Darth Vader music. Hamilton. He did not mean to enter particularly into the subject bullshit.
Now hang on. Isn't that the way dirtbags always do it? I don't mean to interrupt here, but yeah, exactly. My first thought too. Yeah, sure he didn't. Go ahead.
He concurred with Mr. Madison in thinking that we were now to decide forever the fate of the Republican government, and that if we did not give to that form due stability and wisdom, it would be disgraced and lost among ourselves, disgraced and lost to mankind forever. It's got to be a strong government.
Well, and it's he made what was a good point kind of dramatic, and this is what he does. But anyway,
in the back of your mind, every time Hamilton thinks, just remember he wants a British mercantilist system with American flavor on it.
And if we don't move in that direction, we'll lose it forever. He would have made a great climate change heretic.
He wants to build an empire. He acknowledged himself not to think favorably of Republican government, but addressed his remarks to those who did think favorably of it, in order to prevail on them to tone their government as high as possible. Big government.
Now, could you see him now? We need windmills. We need. I'm sorry. Go ahead. He would have been perfect for some of today's leftist movements.
He professed himself to be as zealous an advocate for liberty as any man, whatever, and trusted he should be as willing a martyr to it through, though he differed as to the form in which it was most eligible. He concurred also in the general observations of Mr. Madison on the subject, which might be supported by others if it were necessary. It was certainly true that nothing like an equality of property existed, that an inequality would exist as long as liberty existed, and that it would unavoidably result from that very liberty itself. This inequality of property constituted the great and fundamental distinction in society. When the tribunicial power had leveled the boundary between the patricians and plebeians, what followed? The distinction between rich and poor was substituted. He meant not, however, to enlarge on the subject.
What he's saying is class warfare is always there. Sounds like the perfect...
He's a leftist. He rose principally to remark that Mr. Sherman seemed not to recollect that one branch of the proposed government was so formed as to render it particularly the guardians of the poorer of citizens, nor to have adverted to the true causes of the stability which have been exemplified in... I don't know what Kant is supposed to be an abbreviation for. In Connecticut, maybe. Under the British system, as well as the federal, many of the great powers appertaining to government, particularly all those relating to foreign nations, were not in the hands of the government there. Their internal affairs were also extremely simple, owing to sundry causes, many of which were peculiar to that country. Of late, the government had entirely given way to the people and had in fact suspended many of its ordinary functions in order to prevent those turbulent scenes which had appeared elsewhere. He asked Mr. S., and I believe he's talking about Mr. Sherman, whether the state at the time dare impose and collect a tax on ye people. To these causes and not to the frequency of elections, the effect, as far as it existed, ought to be chiefly ascribed.
Now, there's two things that you pick up on in there. A, identity politics, and B, you got to be taxing people. How are you going to run this thing if you don't have the money? But see, you have too frequent of elections, so really, you don't dare tax because everybody's afraid they might lose their position. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, Hamilton's on his own page here. He's not even. He's basically trying to take this whole convention in a totally different direction, and nobody else is really listening to him. It doesn't keep him from blabbering on.
Yeah, and take mind at the moment that his countrymen from New York are basically anti-federalist minded and would become anti-federalists, and they're listening to him representing their state in the way that he is. Because I don't believe Lansing and Yates are gone yet. That's coming soon.
Yeah. And the other thing to remember is Hamilton basically was sent there by a group of what we would call, well, they became the industrialists, the mercantilists, some New York business interests.
Yeah. Well, he represented New York City, and Lansing and Yates represented the rest of New York. And then, as it is today, New York City was industrialized. It was democratized. It was
mercantilist. It was mercantilist.
Yeah, they were mercantilists, while the rest of the state was very agricultural, agrarian, and had more of an attitude of government, stay out of my business. I just want to do my thing, leave me alone kind of attitude. And that was very true in New York then, as it is today.
Yeah, there's an interesting story. I'll save this one for later. Forget I said that.
Well, see, now I'm going to be sitting here. What story? Oh, man.
Well, Tammany Hall would come into existence just a few short years later. And that's the story I don't want to get into yet.
Gotcha. I was reading about Tammany Hall just the other day because of another book I'm reading. But anyway, go ahead.
Mr. Gary wished we could be united in our ideas concerning a permanent government. All aim at the same end, but there are great differences as to the means. One circumstance he thought should be carefully attended to. There were not 1/1000th part of our fellow citizens who were not against every approach towards monarchy. Will they ever agree to a plan which seems to make such an approach? The convention ought to be extremely cautious in what they hold out to the people. So basically he's countering Hamilton here. Whatever plan may be proposed will be espoused with warmth by many out of respect to the quarter it proceeds from, as well as from an approbation of the plan itself. And if the plan should be of such a nature as to rouse a violent opposition, it is easy to foresee that discord and confusion will ensue, and it is even possible that we may become a prey to foreign powers.
That's pretty rich coming from a guy and that Gary Mandarin will be named after. But anyway, go ahead.
He did not deny the position of Mr. Madison that the majority will generally violate justice when they have an interest in doing so, but did not think there was any such temptation in this country.
Once again, pretty rich coming from this guy, but go ahead.
Our situation was different from that of Great Britain, and the great body of lands yet to be parceled out and settled would very much prolong the difference. He's talking about the Northwest Territories. This is a big issue even to this day.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding the symptoms of injustice which had marked many of our public councils, they had not proceeded so far as not to leave hopes that there would be sufficient sense and justice of virtue for the purpose of government. He admitted the evils arising from a frequency of elections and would agree to give the Senate a duration of 4 or 5 years. A longer term would defeat itself. It never would be adopted by the people. Interesting that they spend so much time trying to figure out how many years the Senate's going to be there, and the topic was so important that their arguments were based on some of the most fundamental issues on determining self-governance, and that's why they spent so much time on this issue. They understood the pros and the cons. Not too hot, not too cold. That's what they're trying to get to.
Yeah. And let me remind the listeners of the story. I think I told the story a couple weeks ago of when Jefferson returned from France after reading the Constitution on foreign shores, and he discussed it with Washington, and he asked about how the Congress was created, about how brilliant it was to have the people's voice in the House, democratically vote in the voice of states in the Senate, 2 per and appointed. And Washington, to explain it, says, well, it's like that cup of tea that you're sipping. The tea in the cup is very hot, and you pour it in the saucer then for it to cool down and sip it from. The cup of tea is the House, and that saucer is the Senate. And what he was saying, to just ad lib a little bit, where cooler heads prevail. So this is what's being created here. So it's kind of fun watching the evolution of these ideas.
All right, James Wilson of Pennsylvania did not mean to repeat what had fallen from others, but would add an observation or two which he believed had not yet been suggested. Every nation may be regarded in 2 relations, 1 to its own citizens and 2 to foreign nations.
And that's a very astute observation. Let's see what he does with it.
It is therefore not only liable to anarchy and tyranny within, but has wars to avoid and treaties to obtain from abroad. The Senate will probably be the depository of the powers concerning the latter objects, foreign affairs.
Yeah, well, and because why? Because they will probably be those who are more skilled in the science of politics. So they're going to understand this stuff better. That's what he's basically saying.
And that's why we would eventually get Senate ratification of treaties.
Mm-hmm.
It ought therefore to be made respectable in the eyes of foreign nations. Talked about the Senate needs to be respectable. It's got to be true statesmen that they will, sit there and entreat with as equals.
Mm-hmm.
The true reason why Great Britain has not yet listened to a commercial treaty with us has been because she had no confidence in the stability or efficacy of our government. You don't sign trade deals with people who aren't going to be in power in 5 years. You want permanency.
And I'm sure right there that Hamilton's licking his chops, because he believes that the best way also to be seen with efficacy and stability in the eyes of others is also to create a really good credit rating. Just saying.
9 years with a rotation will provide these desirable qualities and give our government an advantage in this respect over monarchy itself. In a monarchy, much must always depend on the temper of the man. In such a body, the personal character will be lost in the political. He would add another observation. The popular objection against appointing any public body for a long term was that it might by gradual encroachments prolong itself first into a body for life and finally become a hereditary one. Which actually has kind of happened. We've seen political dynasties.
Sure.
It would be a satisfactory answer to this objection that as 1/3 would go out triennially, there would always be 3 divisions holding their places for unequal terms, and consequently acting under the influence of different views and different impulses. On the question for 9 years, 1/3 to go out triennially, it gets put to a vote. And I want to read this vote. Massachusetts is no. Connecticut's a no. New York's a no. New Jersey's a no. Pennsylvania's an aye. Delaware's an aye. Maryland's a no. Virginia's an aye. South Carolina's a no. North Carolina's a no. South Carolina's a no. And Georgia's a no. The no's carry it.
And what fascinates me is it did not surprise me that Virginia and Pennsylvania said aye, but it surprised me that Delaware did.
On the question of 6 years, 1/3 to go out biannually, we have an aye, a no, a no. Pennsylvania's an aye, Delaware's an aye, Maryland's an aye, Virginia's an aye, North Carolina's an aye, South Carolina's a no, Georgia's a no. The ayes win at 7-6. That's how close it was.
7-6 or 4.
How are we doing on time here? We are 1 hour and 4 minutes. Let's wrap it up there for today.
Okay.
Next, they're about to jump in the next question of to receive fixed stipends, however you want to pronounce it, for compensation of services. It's a bit of a dole.
But the thing is, if I might, it's fascinating how they kind of, use almost a contradiction language, a stipend and compensation. Now, a stipend isn't necessarily a salary, but it leans in that direction. But compensation is more of, well, you lost this, so we want to give you this. It's less a salary and more a, well, compensation. And they do eventually use that latter term in the Constitution. Yeah, my fire is almost out. My wood burning stove. We had rain the last couple days. It's a cold morning. Man, I got to put more logs on the fire. So I agree. Let's stop right here. But folks, it's been a pleasure being here. And I have failed because I haven't been putting these episodes on DouglasVGibbs.com. That I do every once in a while. And so what I plan to do today, once this thing gets on Rumble, is we're going to put this video, if you can't, go to Warhamster to watch it. But if you go to DouglasVGibbs.com, it's still going to count for Warhamster's website if you go there to watch it. But what I'm going to do also is I'm going to research all of the past episodes, and I'm going to put a link for all of them over at DouglasVGibbs.com under the video banner. And because I want you to catch up if you're new to this. You're like, wow, that was great. I wish I would have heard the old. I am going to do the research for you. DouglasVGibbs.com, videos. And I'll have them all there for you. Warhamster, it's been a pleasure as always. They can find me at DouglasVGibbs.com. DouglasVGibbs.com. Where can they find you, sir? Right here.
On X, it says right there on the screen, it's War_Hamster1776. And on Rumble, which you're probably watching right now, is Warhamster. And yeah, this is a fun one. I mean, we've known our whole lives why we had we have 6-year Senate terms. Now we know why. And it barely passed, but the reasons behind it. And, this is another example of Hamilton not getting his way.
That always puts a smile on my face.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching, everybody. Till the next time. Cheers.